The legend of the Red Baron was born.
You needed to recognize each other, and it's from that you start getting aircraft being painted either in squadron colors or in individual colors. And for Richthofen to actually paint his aircraft completely red, it did become a talisman.
One of the things that his men liked about him the best was that he would not let them down. He was always there, always watching, always trying to get them to improve. He would keep his eye on all of his men at the same time. He could be engaged in a very difficult single combat, yet when he came down on the ground, he was able to tell each man what he had done right and what he had done wrong.
Throughout the spring of 1917, the German Jastas wreaked havoc. On the ground, the Allies launched an attack on the stronghold of Vimy Ridge that cost both sides a total of some 30,000 casualties. The killing in the air was equally brutal. Allied reconnaissance and fighter support for the offensive below was annihilated. In a single week of what became known as Bloody April, the Royal Flying Corps lost 75 aircraft. Its teenage pilots were often going into combat with as little as 18 hours flying time. They learned fast or died. The life expectancy of a new pilot in 1917 was a matter of weeks. Man for man, the proportion of those killed in action in the skies may have even exceeded the carnage in the trenches below.
And the whole month they'd shot down 362 Allied airplanes. Richthofen and his men and the chaps in other units, they created havoc in April 17. The Royal Flying Corps never had such serious losses. It was the worst month of the war for them.
In Bloody April, Allied losses in the skies outnumbered the Germans by 4-1. Von Richthofen's personal tally was now 52 kills. He was the leading ace of the war.
He didn't mind having a kill which was completely defenseless. Indeed, he preferred it. He would tend to avoid combat where he perceived any risk, but he would go in when he thought he was able to achieve his kill. He would go in very, very close, and he would fill the enemy with lead.
In the wake of their severe losses, the British began delivering new aircraft to the front. The SE-5A, a fast and powerful climber. The Sopwith Camel, one of the most maneuverable fighters ever. And the Bristol, a versatile two-seater that could hold its own as a fighter. The pendulum of war began to swing back to the Allies.
These aircraft were almost as good, if not better, than the Germans. There was an essential parity of technology in the sky. One British aircraft may have done something slightly better than another German aircraft, but it was swings and roundabouts. And from that time on, the war in the air was more about numbers.
The Germans couldn't replace aircraft as quickly as their opponents, so they tried a new tactic. They combined Jasta squadrons into larger units that could be moved around to key pressure points on the front line. These mobile fighter wings, the famed flying circuses, proved highly effective. The first one was led by von Richthofen.
They were like a firefighting service because they didn't have the numbers to be able to take on the British and the French everywhere along the line. So what they did was they'd pack up their aircraft, go by road, set up camp around 3 or 4 airfields around a town and fight until the danger was over and then move elsewhere. So they were like a travelling circus.
Despite the great success of the flying circus, von Richthofen was no longer so sure of his own invincibility. In a skirmish with British two-seaters, the Baron suffered a severe head wound that nearly cost him his life.
The head wound affected his personality pretty severely. He started to have headaches frequently, depression. He'd had a concussion, of course, and that affected his brain a little bit. But he started to become a little more grouchy, and for the first time he had a sense of his own mortality. He knew that he was not going to survive the war.
But in the remaining months of his life, the Baron acquired a vital new combat advantage. Anthony Fokker, the designer, had been working on a revolutionary new fighter aircraft, the DR-1 triplane. In August 1917, he delivered it personally to von Richthofen. The DR-1's triple wing gave it the ability to climb rapidly and turn on a dime. In von Richthofen's skillful hands, it was a lethal machine.
It had tremendous advantages in maneuverability, and von Richthofen would have liked it for that, because he was able to fly it to its limit and make almost certain that nobody could ever get on his tail.
As the war entered its fourth year, the aerial arms race reached a climax. War had transformed the fragile flying machines of 1914 into high-powered, heavily armed fighter airplanes. By 1918, the skies above the Western Front witnessed a terrifying dance of death.
This is the era of the dogfight, and some pilots said actually that by 1918, if there weren't 60 aircraft involved, you couldn't call it a dogfight. Great swirling beehive of activity and danger in a box of air a mile square. Quite extraordinary sight to see.
Such deadly aerial warfare was unimaginable back in 1905, when the Wright brothers' offer to develop a military aircraft had been rejected. The United States had fewer than 300 unarmed airplanes when President Wilson declared war on Germany in April 1917. It took a year before regular U.S. squadrons arrived at the front, flying mostly French-built fighters. 2 American squadrons flew British Sopwith Camels and were attached to the RAF. Aces like Eddie Rickenbacker would soon become America's first war heroes of the air. Germany was determined to counter the mounting Allied threat before American arms could prove decisive. The final German offensive of the war began in the spring of 1918. More than ever, the German forces relied on their mobile flying circuses to clear Allied planes from the skies. The Baron's own circus was soon in action. And on Saturday, April 20th, von Richthofen scored his 79th and 80th kills, shooting down 2 Sopwith Camels. Billeted at this small chateau, von Richthofen was just 2 days from going on leave. But fatefully, he had one more day of flying combat. The morning of Sunday, April 21st, 1918, was unusual. The wind, which normally ensured that most air combat occurred over German lines, had reversed direction. At 9:45, the Baron took off with 2 small formations of Fokker triplanes. A little after 10:40, they spot a patrol of 5 Sopwith Camel fighters from RAF 209 Squadron and turn to face them. As the dogfight begins, 2 novice pilots, 1 German, 1 Allied, are under strict instructions to remain above the fray. Von Richthofen is babysitting his young cousin Wolfram. Likewise, Wilfred May, a new recruit from Canada, has been ordered by Captain Roy Brown not to engage the enemy.
Roy told him to not get involved in any flight, to get up on top, watch, get used to seeing other aircraft in the air, don't do anything stupid and come back alive. He was frightened out of his mind, I'm sure, at that point.
As fighting erupts, May stays above the combat as instructed. But when he sees a triplane tantalizingly close, adrenaline takes hold and he decides to attack. The pilot is Wolfram von Richthofen. The Red Baron's eagle eye quickly spots the danger. Suddenly finding himself under attack, May breaks away from the fight and dives desperately for home. Sensing his 81st victory, von Richthofen closes in to get behind May. Eyewitnesses on the ground spot the two fighters heading down the Somme Valley. Moments later, a third airplane is seen. It is Captain Roy Brown giving chase to protect his young recruit. Von Richthofen attacks. Although the Camel can fly faster than the triplane, May shows his inexperience by zigzagging, which slows him down.
He was doing things that you shouldn't do with an aircraft. He was really frightened at that point and didn't know what to do, so he started flying very erratically. He was doing tight turns, he was zooming around trees, very close to the river.
Von Richthofen fires again, but at least one of his guns jams and May is reprieved. Now over Allied territory, ground gunners are trying to get the red triplane in their sights.